Habibat was used to the struggles of life in Lagos. She lived in a small, crowded apartment with her mother, who had been sick for months, and her father, who tried his best but never seemed to make enough money. Habibat worked long hours at a retail job, earning just enough to help with groceries and bills. But despite her hard work, they never seemed to get ahead. One rainy afternoon, after receiving a call from the doctor that her mother's condition had worsened, Habibat sat on her bed in tears. She held her head in her hands, feeling completely helpless. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't see a way out. The bills stacked on the table, the endless medical costs, and the fear of losing her mother felt like a heavy burden. As Habibat cried, she didn't notice the change at first. It wasn't until a few coins rolled off the edge of her bed and onto the floor that she stopped, stunned. She wiped her eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light, but when she looked again, there were more coins, glimmering on the floor. The sound of clinking metal was the only noise in the room. Habibat gasped, unsure of what was happening. She wiped her face again, and more coins appeared. What is this?" she whispered, reaching down to touch the coins. They felt warm to the touch, like they had been in the sun for hours. Her heart raced as she tried to understand what was happening. She looked around the room, half expecting someone to pop in and tell her it was all a joke. But no one came. Tears still slid down her face, but now, instead of just feeling sad, Habibat felt something else, a flicker of hope. Each tear seemed to bring more coins, more money than she had ever seen in her life. She wiped her eyes again, and the money multiplied. It was at that moment that Habibat realized, her tears, her sorrow, were making money appear. She could hardly believe it. Every time she cried, gold coins and crisp paper bills appeared before her. It felt like a dream, but she knew it wasn't. For the first time in what felt like forever, Habibat saw a way out of her problems. She could use this money to help her family. Maybe she could get her mother the treatment she needed. Maybe they wouldn't have to struggle anymore. But there was a voice in her head that cautioned her. What if this gift came with a price? But Habibat didn't have time for doubts. She gathered the money quickly, thinking about what it could mean for her family. She put it all in a small box, careful to hide it from anyone who might notice. She wasn't ready to share this gift with the world yet. What if someone took advantage of her? What if they asked for more? No, this was hers, and she would control it. But first, Habibat didn't tell anyone about the money. She couldn't. The idea of people knowing about her strange gift felt too risky. She had already seen how the world could be, people who only wanted to take, never giving anything back. Her family had always struggled, but now, with this gift, Habibat could make a difference. She could finally help her mother, pay off some bills, and ease the burden on her father. But there was still a sense of unease in her heart. How long could she keep this secret? What if someone found out? Would they think she was cursed? What if the money didn't last forever? Every time she cried, the money seemed to appear without fail, but Habibat couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. For the next few weeks, Habibat used the money in secret. She bought her mother's medicine and paid for the best doctors in the city. She fixed the broken windows in their apartment, and for once, there was enough food on the table. It felt too good to be true, but she refused to question it. Her mother noticed the changes right away. "Habibat, I don't know how to thank you for everything," she said, looking at the fresh food in the kitchen and the repaired furniture. "I feel better, thanks to you." Habibat smiled weakly, her heart heavy with the secret she was hiding. "You don't have to thank me, Mama," she replied softly. "I'm just happy to see you well." But as the days went by, Habibat noticed something strange. Every time she gave, every time she helped someone, the feeling in her chest grew heavier. Her tears seemed to come more easily now. Each drop seemed to make more money appear. It was like the more she cried, the more money came, but the more she lost herself in the process. Her best friend, Tai, had noticed the changes too. Tai had been Habibat's friend since childhood, and she wasn't one to miss things. "You've been acting weird, girl," Tai said one afternoon. I mean, look at you. You're smiling more, your mom is better, and you've got money. Where did all this come from? Habibat froze. She couldn't tell Tai the truth. She couldn't risk it. I don't know, Tai. Maybe I'm just lucky, she lied, trying to smile casually. But deep down, Habibat knew the truth. The money came when she cried, and the more she gave, the more she needed to cry. The weight of her secret grew, and she realized she could not keep this hidden forever. As the weeks passed, Habibat's secret became harder to manage. People in her neighborhood began to notice the changes in her life. They saw her mom getting better, her home looking more comfortable, and Habibat seemed to be thriving. It wasn't long before the requests started. It began with one neighbor. Mrs. Abiola, an older woman who lived across the hall, knocked on her door one afternoon. Habibat, my daughter's school fees are due, but I don't have enough money, she said, her voice full of desperation. Could you lend me something? Habibat hesitated. She had seen Mrs. Abiola's struggles. She knew how hard it had been for her to make ends meet. But Habibat didn't know how to explain where the money came from. She couldn't. So, instead, she just nodded and went to her room. When she cried, the money came. She gave Mrs. Abiola what she needed, but the sense of unease in Habibat's chest grew. She had been able to help, but at what cost? Every time she used her gift, it felt like a piece of her soul was being drained. The tears came more easily, and they came in larger quantities. As the requests increased, Habibat found it harder to say no. Neighbors who had borrowed from her in the past, people who had never offered anything in return, started knocking on her door. Habibat, we are struggling. Can you help us? At first, Habibat wanted to help. She wanted to make a difference in their lives, just like she had in her own family's life. But as the days wore on, the burden of giving became too much. She had to cry more often, and each time, the money seemed to slip away faster. It was no longer just a gift, it felt like a curse. Habibat didn't understand what was happening, but she knew that the more she gave, the more it hurt. Her body felt weaker, her energy drained, as though the act of crying and giving was slowly taking something from her. The money came, yes, but at what cost? One night, after helping several people in the neighborhood, Habibat sat in her room, her hands shaking. She had given everything she had, her money, her time, her tears, and yet it never seemed to be enough. The more she gave, the more they asked. She felt like she was being drained, and the weight of the money she had created seemed heavier with each passing day. Her mother, who had been feeling better, noticed the change in her. Habibat, what's going on? You look tired. You're not the same anymore, her mother said, concerned. Habibat forced a smile. I'm fine, Mama. Just a little tired. But she wasn't fine. Habibat knew that her gift was coming with a cost she hadn't expected. The tears that had once brought relief were now a painful reminder of the toll they took. Every tear she shed seemed to take something from her, and she didn't know how much longer she could continue. The breaking point came when Mrs. Abiola came knocking again, this time with a new request. Habibat, she said in a trembling voice, my daughter is falling behind in school. The school says she needs extra tuition, but I can't afford it. Please, can you help me again? Habibat felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had already helped Mrs. Abiola twice, and yet, the woman was back again, asking for more. It wasn't that Habibat didn't want to help, she did. But something inside her was breaking. She had given so much already, and every time she cried to create the money, it felt like a little piece of her was being stolen away. She was running on empty. The pressure was unbearable. Habibat tried to explain to Mrs. Abiola that she had given enough, but the older woman's desperation weighed heavily on her heart. Habibat, please, she pleaded, I don't know who else to turn to. Habibat excused herself and went to her room. She could feel the tears building inside her, but this time, something was different. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to give anymore. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, but the tears came anyway. They spilled down her face, and as they fell, the familiar sound of coins clinking against the floor echoed in her ears. The money piled up quickly, but with it, Habibat felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was like a dark cloud hanging over her, consuming her. She couldn't stop crying, but she didn't feel the relief she once had. Instead, she felt emptier, as if the money she was creating was draining her very soul. Habibat collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The room seemed to spin, and the coins kept coming, spilling from her hands, scattering across the floor. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, as though her heart was being squeezed from the inside out. The tears, once a gift, now felt like a curse. She had to stop. She couldn't keep doing this. The price was too high. The next morning, Habibat woke up with a heavy heart. Her body ached from the strain of the night before. The tears had left her feeling weak and empty, and the money she had created seemed to weigh down on her like an invisible burden. She knew that she had to make a choice. She could no longer continue using her tears to create money. It was destroying her, and she could feel herself slipping away with every cry. Habibat went to visit her grandmother, the one person she trusted with her heart. Her grandmother was an old, wise woman who had seen many things in her time. When Habibat explained everything, her grandmother listened carefully, her face serious. "Habibat, my child," her grandmother said softly, "there are gifts in this world that come with a price. Some gifts are not meant to be used lightly. The more you give, the more you lose. You must learn to control this power, or it will consume you." Habibat felt a lump rise in her throat. Her grandmother was right. She had been using her gift without thinking about the consequences, and now she was paying the price. "Grandma, I don't know how to stop," Habibat admitted, her voice breaking. "The money comes when I cry, and I just want to help. But it's hurting me." Her grandmother nodded, taking Habibat's hands in hers. "The key to controlling your gift is not to give it freely to everyone. It's to know when to stop, when to say no. You must find balance, my child. Giving from a place of love is one thing, but giving out of guilt or desperation will only take more than you can afford to give." Habibat took her grandmother's advice to heart. It wasn't easy, but she made the decision to stop using her tears to create money. She would no longer let her emotions control her. She would no longer give in to the pressure of others' needs. For the next few weeks, Habibat focused on healing herself. She spent time with her mother, helping her recover without relying on the strange gift. She worked hard at her job, doing her best to earn money the old-fashioned way. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she wished she could go back to crying and creating money, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Habibat's life slowly began to return to normal. Her mother was doing better, and they were finally able to make ends meet without the aid of her mysterious gift. But the real change came from within. Habibat had learned to control her emotions, to set boundaries, and to give without losing herself in the process. One day, as she sat in her room, Habibat reflected on everything that had happened. She remembered the pain and the temptation to give more than she could, but she also remembered the joy that came from helping others in a way that didn't cost her soul. She had learned the hard way that true wealth wasn't found in money, but in balance and in knowing when to say no. Habibat had discovered that her gift was not just about the money, it was about understanding the value of self-care, love, and boundaries. She had given everything she could, but now she was giving to herself. And that was enough.